Okay, good evening. Welcome to Earth to the Other Side. My name's John Glasspool. I have a special guest tonight, Lisa Jones, and she's a divine spiritual mentor. Just love the ring of that. She's also the author of The Art of Living Happy After the Loss of a Loved One. Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you.
You're
I'm
welcome.
thrilled to be here. I'm so glad we connected, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too. Thank you so much. So let's get started. I wanted to talk to you about, as we discuss some shared death experiences. You had an experience with Baba Ram Dass. Would you like to talk about that, or do you want to wait?
I would love to talk about that.
Okay.
That was
the floor is yours.
Yeah, great. That was my most recent shared death experience. He passed away, I think it was December 22nd, 2019. And he and I had met. I'd known him for 5 years since I moved here to Maui. In fact, he was one of the first experiences I had on Maui. I met somebody who was in his inner circle, and I was like, wow, if there's anything that ever comes up, I would love to be invited. And sure enough, they were doing a big fundraiser a few days later, and he said, oh, well, I just happened to have heard that there's an extra ticket if you'd like it. And I said, oh, of course, I'd love to attend. Well, little did I know it was his personal caregiver's extra ticket. So I sat next to Ram Dass in this giant building it's the Maui Arts and Cultural Center. And so that was my first real exposure to him. And I had never really, I had heard of him. I knew somewhat about his LSD experiences and that he'd worked at Harvard and things like that, but I've never actually been a follower. But from the minute we met, we just connected at such a deep level. He used to go swimming. He had a stroke, so he was not very mobile, but he had a beautiful team of caregivers that helped him. So I would go swimming, and then I'd be invited to his home, and they'd do kirtan and things like that. Well, the day that he passed, I actually had taken a nap, which is not super usual for me. It was kind of like, wow, so I laid down. And when I stood up next to my bed, it all of a sudden, it felt like somebody pushed my shoulder, and I fell onto the bed, and out of my mouth came, Ram Dass, what are you doing? And I'm like, wait, why did I just say that? That was so weird. What just happened? And so literally I say Ram Dass did a drive-by, because an hour later I get a text that he had passed away. And I was flabbergasted that had happened. So that was that was the first moment. Well, then the next day, so that was on a Sunday, then Monday, that was the 23rd, I had gone for a chiropractic, treatment. And I was laying on the table, and all of a sudden I just felt Ram Dass's energy just floating above me. And I just said, oh my gosh, Ram Dass, go to the light, go to the light. And he said, Lisa, you are the light. And then It was like, he just felt like all of his energy just went over me like a blanket. And I just started crying. Tears just fell from my eyes, and I just felt this warm, wonderful, loving experience with him. So that was the 23rd. And then on Christmas Day, I was invited to go to his home and sit with his body and just we were all, doing meditation and holding space for him. And you were able to go up and put your hands on him if you'd like. And so I put my hands on his, closed my eyes. And then he said, are you ready for a ride? And all of a sudden he took me out into the stars, took me all around the universe. And it was just like this galactic experience with him. And it was phenomenal. So wow. That was my experience with Ram Dass, my shared death experience.
Incredible. How did the energy feel when you were like with him and traveling?
Going back to my first shared death experience, which was with my husband, and that was 18 years ago. And when I went to the other side, immediately I entered into an unconditional love expanse, is all I can say. And the colors are beyond anything we have here on this planet Earth, and just the welcoming of being home. So that's what it was with Ram Dass. Immediately after I put my hands on his, it just took me into that realm again of just pure unconditional love. If you can just imagine, it's kind of like Christmas morning, waking up and seeing if you celebrate that tradition, but when you walk in as a young kid, seeing all those presents and imagining Santa Claus and it's just like that magical moment. And that's what it was, but it just was a prolonged magical moment.
What was the transition like?
Pretty much when I felt the push, that was a literal physical push, right? So I didn't feel or see anything else other than that. And then, like I said, out of my mouth came the words, "What are you doing, Ram Dass?" And which surprised me. That's what was odd to me, was like, why would I say that? But then afterwards I was like, oh, he literally did a drive-by and pushed me over. And it was, it was a joke. I mean, because he had been in a wheelchair for so long, it was like he was finally mobile and he was out and giving people high fives and knocking them over. And
he wanted to reassure you how great he was doing.
Yes, exactly. And then the next day when I was on the chiropractic table and his energy just came over me again, it was that warmth and love and protection. And like I said, the tears just started flowing out of me, and not from sadness, but from the connection, us melding together, if that makes sense, and just that overflowing sense of joy and love and connection. And then when I put my hands on, it was an immediate, we shot through a rocket and just right into the stars. Actually, another just amazing one was my mom. So she had gone to Kauai for a 30-day vacation, and while she was there, she said, you've got to come over and stay with me while I'm here. She was there with my stepdad, and I said, well, let me look into frequent flyers or something, because I was like, I don't want to fly from, I was living in Connecticut, to Maui or to Kauai. I mean, that's a huge, ticket. So I look online and oh my goodness, I think it was 75,000 miles, and I got a first class ticket to go there. Direct New York to Kauai. I'm like, whoa, okay, I can't not go, So I end up going, and we had a wonderful time. Although she was feeling very distracted. She was feeling like, I feel like there's so many things in my life that I haven't completed, or that I feel shame around. And I don't know, I'm just kind of agitated all the time. So I took her on a guided meditation, and her little spirit animal was her cat that had passed away about a year earlier, and her name was Senta. And so Senta came, and I just had her go into a garden and pull out all the weeds of things that weren't serving her any longer, and then plant any new seeds she wanted to. And then we wrapped up the meditation, and she came out and she felt so much better. She was just like, oh my gosh, that made such a big difference. And so then when I was leaving, and ironically, I had friends on Kauai, and I was going to go hiking, and then I had a flat tire. So I ended up spending time with my mom. I was going to go do something else, and then I wasn't feeling great. So I spent more time with my mom. And then I was going to fly home, and there was a big storm. And so I got to stay for 2 more days because I couldn't fly back to the East Coast. So I got all that extra time with my mom. As I left, I was rolling my little roller suitcase out to the rental car, and all of a sudden it was like I walked through a threshold. And it's like, you're going to be back in a week and something will have happened to your mother. And I'm like, what? I've had premonitions, but that was like the most clear. And yet I was like, I reject this. No, I didn't say anything to her. I just went on, and I actually flew home, turned around and flew to Ireland. Our nephew was getting confirmed. And then I flew home the following week. I landed, we got home. Phone call from my mom earlier in the day. She said, oh my God, I don't want to leave. I love it here so much. And tomorrow's our last day. And I thought, I'll call her tomorrow. I'm so tired from the flight. 2 hours later, the phone calls. It's my stepdad. Your mom has had a stroke. You need to come back. So as I unpacked my bag from Ireland, repacked it for Hawaii, laid down, because I had a couple of hours before I was going to be taken to the airport. And all of a sudden I felt a little cat jump up on my bed, and I could hear it purring. And all of a sudden, how cats start kneading on the, and I could feel that. And again, my whole body is chilling. And I'm like, oh my God, this is my mom's cat. And then my mom's energy came in like a tsunami. It was like a big wave right over. She's like, you said we'd be able to communicate when I went to the other side. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. And I'm laying there. I don't want to open my eyes. I mean, I was fully awake. This was not, but my eyes were closed, but I could feel her energy. And she's just like, I love you so much. And you've been the best daughter. I mean, it was just like being flooded with her beautiful, beautiful pink energy and just wrapped in her love and care. And I was like, oh my God. Well, I didn't want to call my stepdad and be like, she obviously died. I don't want to fly all the way there, and then, so I just was like, I'm not gonna call him. But I called my brother on the way to the airport and said, oh my God, Mom came to me. He said, she came to me too. And she showed him that where he was going to buy a house and how he was going to remodel it. And I was like, oh my God. So then I get to the airport, get the rental car and drive directly to the hospital. I walk into the ICU and my mom sits up and she looks at me eye to eye, and then she's down. And it took her, it was 5 more days before she passed. My brother actually was able to fly out. But it was just one of the most beautiful, I mean, having that, I didn't realize that spirit could leave the body, the physical body, and go in and out. Like, I was like, what?
I do it every night.
Well, I guess you're right. You're absolutely right. I just had never equated it, especially, at near the time of death or whatever so that was another very classic shared death experience. And then it was crazy because after 5 days, my stepdad really wanted to fly her home and put her in care and all this stuff. And ironically, one of his son's best friends is like the top neurologist in Minneapolis, was coming to Kauai for vacation on that Thursday, or I guess it was Friday morning. And because we were debating, like, do we take her home or put her in hospice, or what are we doing? So he comes directly to the hospital. He did an evaluation and he just said, there's really no hope. Even if she wakes up, she won't be able to do all these things. So the coincidence of this top neurologist, to come and give that evaluation. And then my stepdad was okay to say, okay, let's do hospice. Meanwhile, my brother and I had already agreed. We were like, oh, we know she's going to die. Like, she had already come and said her goodbyes to us. Yeah. And then once he agreed, we went to lunch, we were chatting, and then the nurse called and said, come right away. She's making a transition. So we got there right like 5 minutes before she took her last breath. But it was so sad. But at the same time, it was
a different angle on it too. So you
can
experience the sadness and the whole appreciation and various other things. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. It was a spectacular, and there was even more to it. I mean, my brother and I were sitting out in the lobby, and we were like on the 3rd floor, like, well, what if she can't feed herself? And all of a sudden, the doors in the elevator opened, and somebody was being pushed out. Was that?
Is that a cardinal?
Yeah, I think it might be.
Just singing like crazy in the background.
There she is talking. Yeah, there she is. That's the cardinal. So it was, again, the more open I am to receive messages like you, and you received that one. I wasn't even paying attention, but
it was like a few, like, I think I'll have to play it back, but I think it was like 3 times it was singing.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. What had taken me, that was my first, I was so afraid. I didn't know what I was doing. Here I was, this like middle-aged mother from Connecticut, and I went to this shaman retreat in Kauai, and they're like, we're going to do ayahuasca. And I'm like, what is that? So I had no idea.
You didn't even know what it was at the time?
I really didn't. They had told me actually like a week before. And ironically, I had already been doing all the things. I had stopped drinking. I was like vegan. It was just like an automatic thing I had already done. So I was all in alignment. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, besides all my near-death or my shared death experiences.
That's very courageous though.
Ayahuasca
is no simple trip.
No, but mine was beautiful. I had the most pristine, gorgeous, amazing, and I'll never do it again because it was so beautiful. I'm like, did it, done it.
But it's great for cleansing, even if you don't have a breakthrough. But you had a breakthrough, so I understand where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, teachers were telling us about their 3 or 4 times of doing it and how awful it was, and they're rolling around in the mud and vomiting and diarrhea. I'm like, why are we doing this? But we ended up driving to this beautiful mansion in Kauai, and she had laid out these white they were like sheepskin beds for each one of us. I mean, it was all pristine and white. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is not the mud, the mud experience that, but yeah. And yeah, fortunately I just had a spectacular experience. So the craziest thing, so my ex-husband, was not into any of this at all. But ironically, when I was so afraid after drinking it, because I'm like, I really thought I was going to die. And so I was saying goodbye to my husband and my 2 kids. And I was just like, oh my God, why have I done this? I'm such a fool, you know?
Why, what were you feeling at that point in time?
Yeah, I literally felt like I was dying. Like, what,
like
why
after
did
drinking it, you mean?
Yeah, after drinking it.
Yeah.
I was terrified. My heart was pounding. I was probably having like a bit of a panic attack because I really didn't know. Like I said, I was a Connecticut housewife going on this ayahuasca trip that I didn't know a whole lot about it. Crazy thing, I called my husband the next morning. And he said, oh my God, I had the weirdest dream last night. I dreamt that I woke up in our bed in our home and there was something knocking on the back door. So he went down the stairs and opened the back door and a jaguar jumped over his shoulder. Well, the jaguar is the spirit animal of ayahuasca. When I told him that, he was like, oh my God, because he didn't think much of all this stuff that I was doing, but I thought that was pretty powerful.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, especially when I was saying goodbye to him, like that's what happened. The jaguar came and jumped over his shoulder right at the same time.
Wow, that's incredible.
Well, I love it too, how that happens, how animals, when they are your spirit guide. I have cardinals as my mom and they come to see me, but at times they literally will come up. Like I was having a massage and all of a sudden I hear this peck, 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 peck on the window. And the massage therapist was like, there's a cardinal like knocking on the window. She's like, I have never seen this before. I'm like, oh my God, that's my mom. Like that is her, like giving me, I mean, I've got chills as I say that, which is truth to me. That's how I know. I love the idea. I mean, we don't know. That's the one thing I will say. I don't know anything other than what I experience and what I think, you know, for me is true. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. And a lot of times that's what I get from spirit is like, you know what, this is just beyond the comprehension of the human brain because it's so multidimensional beyond here that we can't even begin to understand, you know, half of what is going on here. But again, it was super powerful. I met Ganesha, I met Jesus, I met one of the things which is so cool because I just got back from Egypt is that I went to this like pyramid and there was a whole line of people and then they were helping people if they wanted to go to the top of the pyramid and it was my turn and I hesitated and they're like, you don't want to go, you know, you don't want to ride. And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, well, then step aside because the person behind you wants to, you know? So I'm like, so a lot of it for me was learning about fear. And that was the other funny part is when it first started, it was like I was a pea in a pea shooter. And it was like, I was just shot into space, similar to what Ram Dass took me into. And then I was floating in with the stars. And then I heard, you know, oh, so you're scared, right? You're really afraid. And I'm like, yes, I'm really afraid. They're like, okay, well, get ready because we're going to just terrify you right now. And I'm like, no, please don't. And then they're like, okay, we're doing it. And all of a sudden this skull came up and like a little eyeball went doing. Oh. And they're like, was that scary? And I'm like, no. They're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to get you this time then. And then they did another similar, and it was hilarious. It playing with me and making it like, yeah, your fear is all within. You're creating a fearful experience and you can just let go. I mean, that released me from so much in my life. That's how I was living life. I was fearful all the time. Everyone. I feel very similarly that, you know, these negative experiences are all self-created. And it's just like, for me, when I saw my husband entering, you know, heaven, my quote unquote heaven, that was my manufactured heaven. That's what I created for me to witness, to prove for myself that, because if I had seen a Buddhist temple or, you know, an ashram or something, like I'd be like, what is happening? This doesn't make sense, right? But but I created exactly the type of heaven that I believed growing up was going to be there. And again, it was all a self-projected, you know, experience. Exactly. But it was so, but the essence of it was pure love and being able to stand. I was with 2 angels and they brought me to this balcony looking down, and down below were all of these spirits that had gathered to welcome Ian home. And there was a giant announcement, the Grand Mr. Ian Sharp is about to arrive. And so they were all coming together, and then a giant door all of a sudden started to move. everybody all at the same time looked at the same, place. And then he started to enter and they all started cheering and just the love and everything. And right at that moment, there was knock, knock, knock. Lisa, wake up, wake up. Ian just took his last breath. I was sleeping in my daughter's room. He was in my bedroom with his brother. And it was like a trap door opened and my body fell back into my spirit fell back into my body. Wow. And I jumped out of bed and I was feeling both elation of, I was elated. I'm like, oh my God. And yet I'm like, wait, he died. I'm supposed to be sad. Wait, I'm like schizophrenic right now. Yeah. I was at kickboxing, and while I was sparring with my coach, all of a sudden out of the corner of my eye, I saw a gentleman walk into the studio, and then he stepped forward. So it wasn't directly, in front of me, but kind of this 45-degree angle. So I saw the person. I could give this the height and the build and kind of generalistics about it. But then he kind of leaned forward and he said, wow, that's so cool. Well, then I was done sparring and I turned to look, there's nobody there. No. And I only saw an apparition of my husband 18 years ago. About 6 weeks after he died, he came to me in full apparition, which was amazing. So this was the second time. Yeah, full, like completely in my, it would be like looking at you. Right. But he was kind of holographic, so I could see kind of behind him, but it was
like full. You're looking through a window kind of.
Yeah, kind of. But I mean, he was more solid than, it was kind of, the opacity wasn't 100%, but it was, Brilliant. 75% or something. And then, because it was Easter night and I was looking out the window and it was raining and I'm like, oh my God, am I going to have to put the eggs outside? Ian loved to do this stuff and I never like to do it. And what am I going to do? And is that airplane? Do you hear that?
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay. It's really loud above my head. So all of a sudden I turn around and there he is standing completely healthy. He had been sick for 7 years with cancer and he was at his ideal body weight and just looked fantastic. And he telepathically just said, you've got this, don't worry, you've got it. And he came out to hug me and his arms just went like right through me, like he just passed. And then he went over and laid on the bed right where he had passed away. And I jumped on the bed and I was just gazing at him. And then he just disappeared into the mattress. So that was my first apparition. Well, then the second apparition just happened it's been maybe 3 weeks ago. And so later that day I called her and I said, well, before we start talking, I just wanted to ask you if this resonates with you. This is what he looked like, da, da, da. And, he said that like, wow, how cool with the kickboxing. And she's like, oh my God. I told him to tell you something that would validate that was him. He loved kickboxing. And actually his father was on the call with her because they had just had his memorial. And he said, oh my God, I taught him kickboxing when he was like 14 years old. And so this makes total sense that he would come into the studio and be like looking at you and watching you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is wild. So
amazing. Yeah. I love it.
I do too. It's been, and I don't know if it was going to Egypt or what. I feel like things have really unlocked for me recently. In the last 6 months, things are more and more things are happening. But I think for everyone, maybe.
You seem very open.
Yeah.
And you're kind of shining a little bit.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. That's good. It's wonderful.
Shining brighter. Well, I had a cool story too about Egypt, which I went in November. I had somebody took me on a guided meditation, and during the meditation, Isis, the goddess, showed up super like clear, almost like an apparition. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like normally I don't see, a lot of people when they do meditations, they see kind of a movie going on. I don't see that. I called myself third eye blind. I'm like, I don't know. I get stuff, but it's just what I imagine, there's no color, there's no pictures or anything like that. But she was full on like, I am here with you now. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, this is so cool. Well, then 2 days later, I found out about this trip to Egypt and I just knew I had to go. I'm like, I don't know why, I've never wanted to go to Egypt, but I'm going to go. I'm excited. And then my son was able to go with me. He's always wanted to go to Egypt. And it just all worked out perfectly with his work schedule. And he had, your visa or your passport has to be a certain amount of months, better after. Oh yeah, there's the bird again. She's back. So it all worked out that he was able to go with me. And then while we were there, Isis was everywhere. And I didn't really understand. I guess the goddess Isis is, a big part of Egypt's culture and all that. It's in the hieroglyphics and everything. And then I went, there was a jewelry store and I saw this ring. I don't know if you can see.
That's beautiful.
It's
I love it.
Yeah, gold, 18 karat gold. And I saw it in the window in this jewelry store. And I'm like, I must have that ring. And I'm like, it was expensive. And I'm like, why do I have to have this ring? But I had to have this ring. I get home, and about a week after I had arrived, I got woken up and I hear Isis in my head saying, go to your app on your phone for Hay House and search Isis, listen to that chapter. And I'm like, what? So I go and I listen. And so I'm walking and I'm listening. And she's like, you have been to my temple and I have gifted you a golden ankh. You are now an initiate of mine, and you are here to do the work of Isis. And I'm like, what is happening? So yeah, so I'm still unfolding that little exciting.
So that's still going on.
That's still happening right now. It's really fun when you let go of all the, like the 3D world, and you're open up to all these amazing. I guess I'd like to share, and this was really interesting, and it's about suicide. And because Robin Williams came to me right after he passed, and he explained to me that suicide, and again, I can't say this is the truth for everybody, but in his case, and then for several people since then, he talked to me about how we have a physical body, we have a spiritual body, we have a mental body. And when our mental body dies, that's what suicide then happens. And the only way for the physical body to die in conjunction with the mental body is for it to take its own self. And that there should be no shame around, suicide, because it's literally like when somebody dies of cancer, we're not like, oh my God, like I wish I had been there for them and I should have done something different. Or, like everyone's like, well, they did chemo, they did everything they could, but their physical body, we just know like that's the logical conclusion, right? When your body can't sustain life any longer. And so what Robin Williams was saying to me is that when your mental body can't sustain life any longer, then the only way for it to have the logical conclusion is to have the physical body take itself. And I just thought that was a really interesting and different way of understanding suicide, taking the shame out of it. And it's just like the logical conclusion of that. And I've shared that with a lot of people that have lost someone through suicide, and they've found that to be, helpful.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that.
Most definitely. Thank you for sharing that. It's a wonderful story. And how, I'm just curious, how did he appear to you? Was it just audible or?
Yeah, it's like a knowing. It's like, it just all of a sudden I get I just want to say a download of the information is kind of in a packet, and it just all of a sudden I know they're talking to me word for word. It just kind of comes in, and it's this thing. Although
you're almost just it's a memory almost.
Yeah, it's almost that's a great way of saying it. It's almost like a memory. We had a really fun group. We had 5 mediums here on Maui, and it was called Maui Channel 5, and we did a celebrity night. So we brought through Robin Williams and Lady Diana and all these, celebrities that have passed away. We had so much fun, and it's really fun to riff off of each other, because we get different aspects of the same, and the same spirit, and it was super fun. And so Robin came through that night as well, and was super animated, came through me. And yeah, he's a fun, he and Wayne Dyer come to me, and Ram Dass, just some really interesting fun people.
So what other kind of things do you teach in the spiritual realm?
Yeah, well, interesting. You asked. I'm working right now on a masterclass called Spiritual Wealth, and I'm working with a friend of mine, Donna Brickwood, and we had worked together actually in a group together with Violet Alchemy Healing, which was phenomenal. It was with a teacher in New York, and all the different light colors and healing aspects, and it's so cool. So ours is called Spiritual Wealth, and it's really about waking people up to, and part of it is my experience of working with actually very wealthy people, and they're completely spiritually bankrupt. And no matter how much money you have, unless you are really tapped in and tuned into your own spirituality and to connection, I believe you're just living a very superficial life. And that's what most people, it's like they can't find their purpose or their passion because they're tied up with, drinking too much or doing drugs or buying too many things or trying to fill themselves with a hole that they can never fill with money.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I'm working on right now. I'm teaching it next week. And I'll even give you a link if you want to add that.
Yeah,
It'll be an ongoing thing, and it's free. So it's just to help people. And it's really about teaching them like to go into nature and to meditate and to do all these amazing things that are free to help you connect with your own, spiritual, like why you're here.
Yeah. Well, it's been lovely talking to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, John. This is such a pleasure. And I'm so glad we connected.
I am too. And I really appreciate everything. And you're sharing your stories. It's really been a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.